On to Colossus 7. We're nearly halfway there. I want to show us navigating the space here because I actually for once want to show the grand scale of the world we are in. We should also take note for a moment, and I'll stop aggro just to show it off. When we look at the areas where we've defeated previous Colossi, there are now pillars of light reaching out into the sky, placing more color into the clouds, whereas sometimes the clouds block out some of the light. A small touch to which we can attribute whatever meaning we choose. Perhaps that light was contained within the Colossi, and now it's free. The northern area of the map, like certain southern parts of the map, really has a lot of light to it, though. And it's nice to have the bridge right next to us, and at least in the frame, to really give us a proper sense of scale. The desert area is a nice juxtaposition for the area that we're going to enter to fight our next boss. For now, let's just sit back and enjoy the space. Alright, now we're getting close to the Colossus. This one has certain problems, but also has some fun design to it. Its name is Hydrus, and if you can guess, just like we did with Avion, it's going to involve water. Water being one of the real challenging things in this game in terms of navigation. On our way to the lake where we'll encounter Hydrus, I do want to stop for a minute and show off these structures. This is actually a save point inside of the game. Many of them dot the landscape. In order to save, you head up, and it should let me. I swear you can save here. When you save, wander praise. So while there's not a large amount of religious imagery or ritual imagery, we actually do have it almost every time we want to save. We get the sense that this area was, perhaps, before it was considered forbidden, a holy place where people dwelled. Maybe it even had a connection to Wander's culture, because he knows to pray at these shrines. In general, a lot of that world building, pardon me, exists, but it's hard for us to really narrow down what some of it means. And so now we have the lake where we're going to fight Hydrus. Hydrus interests me for a couple of reasons. One, because we're fighting in such a strange and different area. There's only going to be one other Colossus that we face that even takes place sort of in a watered area. I'm also interested in Hydrus because of the amount of sigils that it has. Hydrus has multiple minor sigils and major sigils. So when we also hear the term High, we might think of the term Hydra. In this case, there's so many sigils and so many things for us to stab and take care of, it feels like we're chopping off one head and only having another appear. Hydrus has what we have as sort of one of the few natural defense mechanisms here. Hydrus is sort of a large electric eel. Most other Colossi that we find either have to use their body or they have weapons. Hydrus is generally passive until we sort of swim and invade its space. One of the reasons I find this a interesting encounter, but not necessarily a fun encounter, is not just the water, but also because it's really hard to get Hydrus's attention. Much like Avion, it's more concerned with residing in the world than actually responding to anything to it. And unlike Avion, we can't do anything to draw its attention. This feeling in the water really makes you feel helpless. So now we finally have some movement, and hopefully we can grab onto part of Hydrus. No such luck. So we have that notion of mounting frustration that will come with trying to get an enemy to do what we sort of want. We're going to sort of just sit back and let the ambience of the area take over for a moment. Hydrus's theme, I believe it's called Silence, is one of the few actual unique bits of orchestration in the game. We'll only hear it at this point of the game. Although we finally have Hydrus, and they seem to be moving towards us. And we might take some injury from these electric shock sort of tendrils, but once we grab onto Hydrus, here we go. Much like Avion, it's a very visually dynamic sequence, although we can't really put a lot of meaning into the form or the animal quality of the Colossus, other than to really back up that notion we've had of Wander destroying natural creatures. In this case, Hydrus just seems to be a creature that could exist in this lake, not something manufactured by magic or brought into being by any sort of religious power. And here we see some of the minor sigils that we'll encounter. It's not necessary to destroy all of these sigils, but like we said, it's sort of like cutting off the head of a Hydra. Hydrus is also one of the few Colossi, I believe maybe even the only Colossus, that we can actually disarm and remove all danger from. Once we get rid of these electric probes, Hydrus can't do anything to us at all. We become a strong aggressor, and Hydrus loses all of its power. In terms of power dynamics, it's one of the few situations where the player can really assert dominance over one of the Colossi. Hydrus can be frustrating, though, because if you take too long, Hydrus might stay underwater. So here, if I hold on, Hydrus is going to dive deep, and it's going to be very hard for me to attack again. In fact, it might be impossible. We'll see something like this again when we encounter another Colossi. In this case, unfortunately, we're going to have to let go and move back up to the surface, hoping that Hydrus will come back to us again. We've been dragged very far into the depths. It's tempting to associate serpent imagery with Hydrus, but it doesn't quite fit. Hydrus isn't really a snake. If we want to pursue that line, it's more powerful for us to see Wander as the sort of thing that tempts Hydrus. So it's actually a serpent story in reverse. Once again, meaning-making, semiotics being anything we want it to be, so long as it sort of makes sense within the text. If we feel it, if we can sort of justify it, then semiotically it's valid. And hopefully we can grab onto Hydrus one more time. There we go. So now when we breach the surface, we're going to have to move very, very fast. It's sort of interesting to note that we have both a notion of being able to assert our power over Hydrus very strongly by moving forward and destroying all of its dangerous self-defense mechanisms, but at the same time, when we're underwater, we actually have almost no control at all. In fact, I'm falling off of Hydrus right now. What's worse, I'm at the end of the tail, so moving up the body is sort of problematic. Once again, I might not even reach the head of Hydrus in time. If we want to look at Hydrus as a puzzle, the puzzle isn't really disarming the beast. It's actually getting to the point that we need to attack. This isn't a unique concept for most Colossi. It's what we have to do for pretty much all of them. But with Hydrus, it's very complicated. You have to take certain risks to see if you can even closely get to where you want to go. This means running very fast across surfaces that might submerge suddenly, or desperately jumping to a position. I think we're going to make it here this time, though. Hydrus can still hurt us, but now that we're at the surface, we can disarm it. And so now, Hydrus is actually completely helpless, and all we have to do is focus on the major sigil. For once, Wander is actually powerful in the space. Hydrus and Avion, along with perhaps Quadratus thus far, have really shown us the notion of destroying nature. Phaedra can probably be included in that notion too. But it's getting really explicit here. We're destroying things, not just these created monsters, but things that sort of exist within the sphere of this space. We are the intruder. The monsters aren't really all the unnatural things in the world. They're unnatural to us, but in comparison to everything else in the world, we're actually the odd object out. And of course, we head back to the central shrine. By now we know this process. With our next Colossus, we'll end up halfway through the game. Each encounter is fairly short. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes if you sort of know what you're doing, and if you don't, you can still intimate what you sort of need to do and get through the process fairly quickly. For extended play, it makes it fairly easy to get through the game in a reasonable amount of time, and if you're breaking up your segments, it means that you can face your enemies one-on-one without any real loss of sense of how you play the game. Because each Colossus still functions basically the same in terms of how you injure them, and that the only thing that changes is the environment or some minor mechanics, you don't really have any times where you're particularly lost in what you're going to do. Your quest is clear, your purpose assured. And by now, we can see that a large amount of doves have gathered around Mono. The contrast between the doves that surround Mono and the shadowy figures that surround Wander interest me to a certain degree. One is clearly getting more pure, and the other is clearly getting more corrupt. In fact, by now, if I pause for a moment and take off Wander's mask, Wander's skin pallor is different than it was at the start of the game. It's paler. He has lines running across his skin. There's visual representations of the corruption that's occurring. Metaphorically, we have it with the doves. We also have it with the shadow figures. And with Wander, we physically have it on his actual player avatar. Let's put that mask back on and get ready for our next fight. That was Hydrus. I will see you all in the excuse me. I will see you all in the next section. Hopefully you enjoyed it.